Another lost contract. My mother's voice dripped with false sympathy across the dinner table. Oh, sweetheart. Maybe this is a sign you should consider something simpler. I gripped my fork tighter, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me react. Actually, Mom, we're doing quite well. The new marketing campaign. Please, she cut me off with a dismissive wave. Your little design studio is hardly worth mentioning in the same breath as Morgan Industries. When I was your age, I was already running a multi-million-dollar company. My name is Alexandra Morgan, and for the past 5 years, I've been trying to build my own design agency while living in the shadow of my mother, Cathy Morgan, CEO of one of the largest marketing firms in Chicago. Every family dinner was the same, her subtle digs, her barely concealed disappointment, her constant reminders of her own success. What she didn't know was that I had proof of exactly how she'd achieved that success, and what she'd done to ensure I couldn't compete. Speaking of Morgan Industries, my father interjected, "Ever the peacemaker, how's the Anderson account going, Cathy?" Mom's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile. "Wonderful. They just signed an exclusive contract. Such a shame they had to drop their previous agency," but she glanced at me meaningfully. "Quality speaks for itself." My stomach churned. The Anderson account had been mine until 2 weeks ago, when they suddenly pulled out citing concerns about our capability. It was the third major client we'd lost this quarter, all following the same pattern. Everything going smoothly until suddenly, mysteriously, they'd withdraw. Later that evening, as I drove home to my apartment, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus, my head of it. "You need to see this. Now." 20 minutes later, I was staring at his computer screen, my hands shaking with rage. "I finally managed to trace the source of those emails," Marcus said, pointing to a series of messages on the screen. "Someone's been sending anonymous tips to our clients, suggesting we're on the verge of bankruptcy. They've also been blocking our proposals from reaching potential clients' inboxes. Look at the IP address." I did. And there it was, Morgan Industries. "That's not all," Marcus continued, pulling up another window. "Remember how our server crashed during the Peterson pitch last month? It wasn't an accident. Someone launched a targeted attack from the same source." I sank into a chair, my mind racing. For years, I'd suspected my mother was somehow interfering with my business. But this was beyond what I'd imagined. She hadn't just been competing with me, she'd been actively sabotaging me. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Based on what I found so far, almost 3 years. Pretty much since you started landing bigger clients." 3 years. 3 years of lost contracts, mysteriously failed pitches, and clients who suddenly developed cold feet. 3 years of my mother's smug smile across the dinner table as she watched me struggle. "Can you document all of this?" I asked Marcus. He nodded. "Already working on it. But Alex, there's something else you should see." He pulled up another screen, this one showing financial records from Morgan Industries. My eyes widened as I scanned the numbers. "Are these legitimate?" "Completely. Your mother's company is in trouble, serious trouble. They've been losing money for months, hiding it with creative accounting. But it's catching up to them. Without a major cash injection or a buyer, they'll be bankrupt within 6 months." I sat back, letting this new information sink in. My mother's company, the empire she'd built, the source of all her pride and condescension, was crumbling. And she had no idea I knew. "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked quietly. I stood up, my decision already made. "First, I want everything documented. Every attack, every blocked email, every piece of interference you can trace. Then I need you to set up a meeting with Claire Thompson, the venture capitalist." "Why?" A small smile played at my lips. "Because we're about to teach my mother a lesson about underestimating the wrong person." The next morning, I met Claire at her downtown office. She'd been trying to invest in my company for months, impressed by what we'd achieved despite the mysterious setbacks we'd encountered. "This is quite a story, Alexandra," she said, reviewing the evidence Marcus had compiled. "Corporate espionage, targeted sabotage. Your mother could face serious charges." "I don't want to press charges," I replied. "Not yet, anyway. I have something else in mind." I laid out my plan. Claire listened intently, her expression shifting from surprise to admiration. "It's ambitious," she said finally. "Risky too. But if it works." "It'll work," I assured her. "My mother's too proud to see it coming. The question is, are you in?" Claire's smile was answer enough. Let's take down a giant. Over the next few weeks, I played my role perfectly. I attended family dinners, accepted my mother's condescension with practiced humility, even mentioned struggling with a few accounts. All the while, Claire's team was quietly putting the pieces in place. The first phase of our plan went into motion on a Tuesday. I was sitting in my office when my phone rang. My father, his voice tight with concern. "Have you talked to your mother today?" he asked without preamble. "No, why?" He sighed heavily. The board called an emergency meeting. Word got out about the company's financial situation. Your mother's. Well, she's not taking it well. I could imagine. Catherine Morgan had built her reputation on being invincible, unbeatable. The idea of her company failing was inconceivable to her. Is there anything I can do? I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. Just, maybe call her? She could use some support right now. I promised I would, then hung up and immediately called Claire. It's starting, I said. How soon can we move? The paperwork's ready, she replied. We can submit the offer whenever you want. I thought about all the contracts my mother had stolen, all the clients she'd scared away, all the times she'd smiled while watching me struggle. Do it now, I said firmly. And Claire? Make sure there's no way to trace it back to me. Not yet. 2 days later, my mother called a family meeting. She looked tired, her usual perfect composure slipping slightly as she paced her home office. I wanted you both to hear this from me, she said, addressing my father and me. A buyer has expressed interest in Morgan Industries. Given the current situation, the board is strongly encouraging me to accept. Who's the buyer? My father asked. Some investment group, Phoenix Capital. I've never heard of them. She waved her hand dismissively. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I've built this company from nothing, and now some faceless corporation thinks they can just swoop in and take it. I kept my expression carefully blank, though my heart was racing. Phoenix Capital was the front company Claire had created specifically for this purpose. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the hard part. What are you going to do? I asked innocently. My mother's jaw tightened. Fight it, of course. I've never backed down from a challenge, unlike some people. She shot me a pointed look. I didn't build Morgan Industries by giving up when things got difficult. No, I thought. You built it by destroying anyone who got in your way, including your own daughter. But soon she would learn exactly what I was capable of. Because Phoenix Capital wasn't just any investment group, it was my company, backed by Claire's money and my years of carefully documented evidence of my mother's illegal business practices. She thought she was facing a faceless corporation. Instead, she was about to learn that her greatest threat had been sitting across her dinner table all along. The next few weeks were a delicate dance. During the day, I ran my design agency and quietly coordinated with Claire's team. At night, I listened to my mother rant about Phoenix Capital's aggressive tactics over family dinners. They're trying to pressure the board, she fumed one evening, stabbing at her salmon. Making all these promises about capital injection and expansion plans. As if some outsider could possibly understand what Morgan Industries needs. I took a sip of wine to hide my smile. The expansion plans had been my idea, targeting exactly the areas where I knew the company was weakest, thanks to years of watching from the sidelines. Maybe they have good intentions, I suggested mildly. The company does need help, Mom. Her eyes flashed dangerously. What would you know about running a company? Your little studio can barely keep its doors open. Thanks to you, I thought, but kept quiet. Instead, I watched as she pulled out her phone and began typing furiously. Another email to the board. My father asked warily. They need to understand what's at stake here, she snapped. I've called an emergency meeting for tomorrow. I'm going to show them exactly why this takeover would be a disaster. Later that night, I met with Claire at her office. The lights of Chicago twinkled behind her as she reviewed the latest updates. Your mother's getting desperate, she said, sliding a folder across her desk. Look what our investigators found. Inside were documents showing recent transfers from Morgan Industries accounts, large sums being moved to offshore holdings. She's trying to hide assets, I said, unsurprised. Anything to make the company look less attractive to buyers. Claire nodded. There's more. She's been reaching out to your old clients, the ones she stole, trying to lock them into long-term contracts before any ownership change. Can she do that? Not legally, no, not without board approval. Claire's smile was sharp. In fact, every move she's making is giving us more ammunition. I leaned back, thinking about the irony. My mother's attempts to maintain control were only making her position weaker. The next day, Marcus called with news. Remember those blocked emails? The cyber attacks? He said. I found something interesting. Your mother didn't just target us. She's been doing it to other competitors too. Small agencies mostly. Places that might have threatened her market share. Can you prove it? Already have. And Alex, some of these companies went under because of her interference. We're talking about serious damages here. I felt a chill run down my spine. How many businesses had my mother destroyed? How many dreams had she crushed? All to maintain her position at the top. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. I watched from my office as my mother strode into the Morgan Industries building, her head high, clutching a presentation folder I knew contained her arguments against the takeover. 2 hours later, my father called. It didn't go well, he said quietly. The board, they're strongly leaning toward accepting Phoenix Capital's offer. Your mother's furious. What happened? He sighed. Someone provided documentation, proof that she's been engaging in unethical business practices, targeting competitors, manipulating clients. The board can't ignore it. Do they know where the evidence came from? No, but your mother's convinced Phoenix Capital is behind it. She's threatening legal action. I ended the call and immediately contacted Claire. We need to move faster. She's going to start digging, trying to find out who's really behind Phoenix Capital. Don't worry, Claire assured me. Everything's in place. The real question is, are you ready for phase 3? Was I? I thought about all the sleepless nights, the lost contracts, the years of enduring my mother's condescension while she actively worked to destroy my business. Yes, I said firmly. It's time. The next morning, an envelope was delivered to Catherine Morgan's office. Inside was a simple meeting request from Phoenix Capital's CEO, scheduled for Monday morning. My mother, of course, couldn't resist. She'd never back down from a confrontation, especially not with a company trying to take over her empire. What she didn't know was that the meeting would take place in my office. I spent the weekend preparing, reviewing every document, every piece of evidence we gathered. Claire's team had done their job perfectly. There was no way to trace Phoenix Capital back to me until the moment I chose to reveal it. Monday morning arrived clear and cold. I got to my office early, setting everything up exactly as planned. At 9:55, my mother's expensive heels clicked down the hallway. She stopped dead in the doorway when she saw me sitting behind my desk. Alexandra, what are you doing here? I have a meeting with Phoenix Capital's CEO. I smiled, gesturing to the chair across from me. Yes, Mom, you do. The color drained from my mother's face as realization dawned. For a moment, she stood frozen in the doorway, her perfectly manicured hand gripping her designer briefcase so tightly her knuckles turned white. This is impossible, she finally managed. You can't be. Phoenix Capital. I finished for her, maintaining my calm. Actually, I am. Well, partly. My company owns controlling interests, backed by some very interested investors who've been watching Morgan Industries for quite a while. She took an unsteady step into my office, her usual composure cracking. Your company? You can barely keep your lights on. You couldn't possibly afford to buy out Morgan Industries. I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on my desk. It's amazing what you can accomplish when someone isn't actively sabotaging your business. Her eyes darted to the folder. What are you talking about? Please sit down, Mom. We have a lot to discuss. She remained standing, her jaw tight. If you think you can blackmail me. Blackmail? I laughed softly. No, this isn't blackmail. This is a business meeting. You wanted to meet Phoenix Capital's CEO to discuss the future of Morgan Industries. Well, here I am. I opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. Let's start with these. Proof of cyber attacks launched from Morgan Industries servers against my company and others. Then we have emails showing how you interfered with our contracts, spread false information about our financial stability, and poached our clients through less than legal means. You can't prove any of that, she snapped, but her voice wavered. Actually, I can. My team is very thorough. But that's just the beginning. I laid out more papers. These show your recent attempts to hide company assets offshore. And these detail every competitor you've targeted over the past decade. The board has copies of everything, by the way. They're very interested in avoiding any potential legal issues. Finally, my mother sank into the chair, her face ashen. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this? Why? I leaned forward, meeting her eyes. For years, I watched you build your empire by destroying others. You taught me that success meant stepping on anyone who got in your way, even your own daughter. But you taught me something else too, something you didn't intend. And what's that? She asked, her voice barely audible. That true success isn't about destruction. It's about building something meaningful, something that lasts. Every client you stole, every contract you blocked, it just made me work harder, think smarter, become better. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. You know what's ironic? If you had just left me alone, let me build my business on my own terms, you might not be in this position now. But you couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding without your help, or worse, becoming competition. So this is revenge? She asked bitterly. I turned back to face her. No, Mom, this is business. Phoenix Capital is offering fair market value for Morgan Industries, plus protections for current employees. The board has already provisionally accepted our offer. All we need now is your signature. I slid the final document across the desk, the purchase agreement. You have two choices. Sign and walk away with your reputation and a very generous compensation package intact. Or refuse and I release everything. The cyber attacks, the client interference, the offshore accounts to the SEC and the press. She stared at the document, her hands trembling slightly. You destroy everything I built. Like you tried to destroy what I built. I countered. The difference is I'm giving you a choice. More than you ever gave any of your victims. For a long moment, silence filled the office. Then, slowly, my mother reached for the pen. You really did all this? She asked as she signed. Built a company strong enough to buy mine, right under my nose. I did, no thanks to you. She set the pen down and stood up, smoothing her skirt with shaking hands. I suppose I underestimated you. You did. But then again, you underestimated everyone who didn't do things your way. As she turned to leave, I called after her. Mom? She paused in the doorway. I learned from you. Everything you did. Everything you were. And I chose to be different. That's your real legacy. After she left, I sat at my desk for a long time, looking at her signature on the purchase agreement. Years of struggle, of fighting against her hidden sabotage, while smiling through family dinners, had led to this moment. Claire arrived an hour later, champagne in hand. Congratulations, CEO, she said, pouring 2 glasses. How does it feel? I thought about my mother's face when she realized the truth, about all the small businesses she destroyed over the years, about the empire she built on others' ruins. It feels like a beginning, I said. Morgan Industries needs to change, become something better than what she made it. And you're just the person to make that happen. Claire smiled, raising her glass. Over the next few months, I merged my design agency with Morgan Industries, implementing the expansion plans we presented to the board. But more importantly, I reached out to the small businesses my mother had targeted over the years, offering partnerships, resources, opportunities to rebuild. My father called regularly, torn between pride in my success and loyalty to my mother. She's not doing well, he said one evening. She misses the company. She misses the power. I corrected him gently. There's a difference. At the first shareholders meeting under my leadership, I stood at the podium and looked out at the faces of employees, clients, and investors. Many had known me only as Catherine Morgan's daughter, the one who couldn't measure up. Now they saw me differently. Morgan Industries was built on the idea that success means dominating others, I told them. Today we're going to change that story. We're going to show that real success comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down. That's not just good ethics, it's good business. The applause that followed felt like vindication, but also like promise. My mother had tried to teach me that the business world was a zero-sum game, where someone had to lose for another to win. In proving her wrong, I'd not only saved her company from her own destructive practices, I transformed it into something she never imagined it could be. Sometimes at night, I look out at the city lights from my office, the same view my mother had enjoyed for so many years, and think about the different paths we'd chosen. She built her empire through fear and destruction. I was rebuilding it through collaboration and growth. In the end, she taught me everything about the kind of leader I didn't want to be, and in doing so, she helped me become exactly the leader the company needed. That was her final, unintended legacy, and the greatest victory of all.